Hello, our friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family.
Hello there, welcome back.
Welcome back, guys. Make sure you subscribe to all the channels. And again, we want to thank everybody over at Patreon. We couldn't do it without the support over at Patreon. Exclusive videos multiple times, typically each week up over there, where we can talk a little bit clearer. And meanwhile, we see here a Russian soldier in Syria shows how the border with Iraq looks like. Piles of uniforms, weapons, and ammunition. The Syrian army ran and threw everything on the ground. What's really going on over here? Well, it's part of the bigger picture. It's part of the greater picture. We should say greater picture. Meanwhile, Assad is confirmed in Moscow after Damascus has fallen. And so what was this? This happened so quick, mind-blowingly fast. I knew this was going to happen, but just how fast really was stunning. Because, again, everything has been telegraphed. Here, this is Dr. Anastasia Maria Lupus. She gained a lot of followers during the last 4 years, let's say, speaking out about a certain thing. And here she says, again, people are celebrating the freedom of Syria. Meanwhile, Israel is coming into Syria. Her statement, I think, is valid with a lot of, unfortunately, the population of the planet that just doesn't seem to get things because, again, in some ways it's not their fault because everything in the world has been done to dumb down the intelligence of this planet. And it's worked to a degree, but at the same time, there is an awakening going on that can't be stopped for those that will resist. Meanwhile, you see IDF fighters on Mount Hermon. Now, IDF, again, this is Israel. Wait a minute, they're on Mount Hermon? Yeah, they're on Mount Hermon. Why does that ring a bell, you may say? Oh, Mount Hermon is famous. It's very, very famous, and we're going to get into that. Then we see a lot of this coming out. In Syria, militias armed by the Pentagon fight those armed by the CIA. What the heck? This is not so confusing. Now, this is another... This is Wall Street Maverick. He's got 1.5 million followers like Dr. Maria does. For 1.5 million followers, in some ways, this man is absolutely clueless. But that's okay, because in this world, you can be absolutely clueless and be extremely successful. That's actually what the world wants. Is just like Rockefeller said, I don't want a bunch of very intelligent people out there. I just need people to work and to do the grunt work. It goes back to the Sumerian stories, the Akkadian, Sumerian, Babylonian stories, literally, of just needing a worker race, a slave race, somebody to do the grunt work. And yet, at the same time, certainly, those that do things very well that the system wants can be very well paid and very successful. Because that's what the system wants.
Indeed, for sure.
Yeah, so when you talk about finance, economics, etc., hey, that's all the system. It's realizing there's a much bigger picture here that's going to change the system. So Israel reportedly seizes the Syrian side of Mount Hermon. Earlier, the IDF deployed in the Golan Heights buffer zone as the situation unfolds rapidly in Syria. And in reality, as you look at Mount Hermon here, Mount Hermon's famous because in the Book of Enoch, this is where the 200 watchers descended to. Again, people believe that the term angel means a non-physical being. And yes, there are angels. This is again where things get a little confusing. There are angels, there are demons, there are many beings that are demonic, and there are many beings that are angelic. And yet, when you get down to physical and vibratory frequency, beings have to have a similar vibratory frequency to appear physical to each other. And thus, when we talk about having offspring, Again, a true non-physical being like an angel couldn't have offspring with somebody that is, or with the body of somebody that is operating in the 3D. It's just an impossibility. And it's a frequency impossibility. It's like trying to mix oil and water, so to speak. Never the two shall meet, never the twain shall meet. This is interesting, though, because this is so symbolic. It's hugely symbolic, and yeah, it's part of the bigger plan, which we've done videos on, and those videos get totally quashed because, again, the most important event perhaps right now that's transpiring, just like when we go back to the end of 2019 and 2020, there was something that the system needed to keep covered up because it was the number one event in play. Well, there's another event in play right now that the system wants to keep covered up, but they won't be able to. They will not be able to. Oh boy, Mount Hermon, where the fallen angels landed. Logo of Paramount Pictures features 22 stars falling down from heaven, landing on top of a mountain. In the book of Enoch, we read how 200 watchers, again, that term, fallen angels, which really, that term, so many of these terms lead the world totally astray, but thankfully, people are waking up and shaking free of this spell. So they made a pact to conspire against humanity and create abominations such as the Nephilim. Again, what's the reality of this situation, and what is the true history? People have done all sorts of diagrams and they've written all sorts of books and stuff explaining exactly, what's going on here. Mount Hermon, 33 degrees north, and, everything that's showing the different sizes of beings like Goliath and King Og, and the average size of the average Philistine over here, the different angels and fallen angels, again, the wings. And when we look again to wings in the Sumerian descriptions and we see beings with wings, what they're really referring to is just simply they have the power to fly. They don't necessarily have wings. And yet, when you do look at a being that could be described as an angel, it may appear to have wings, and that's due again to the light body emanating and what we call a Merkaba. So there's so many things that there's so many details that are not really explained, but there are explanations for the details.
And there's plenty of explanations. It's just a matter of going out and finding them.
And having the patience to look at them instead of, again, a TikTok mentality where I only have 90 seconds to understand this topic. And, 90 seconds is not enough time to understand a lot of things. You don't get a degree in rocket science in 90 seconds. Absolutely not. Same thing with biology, physiology, etc. We see in Book of Numbers 13:33, and we saw giants, the sons of Anak. Well, that looks like the root from Anakim, Anunnaki, right? I mean, these are, again, terms that we have to understand. Where they come from the same sources, and these sources over time have been distorted and twisted. So you see, 36 foot tall down to, average guy today, maybe 6 foot tall or thereabouts. When we look to some depictions, like the tomb of King Og of Bashan, King Og obviously was pretty big, because here you see normal-sized humans, and here we see giants, right? Yeah, King Og was very big, and, it's fascinating because Bashan is, again, an area that we're talking about right now. We're talking about Lebanon, Syria, northern Israel. In Bashan, there were cities that only 150 years ago, 160 years ago, were loaded with giant houses and giant living places, still completely intact, not even 200 years ago. Empty, because they were all gone. The giants had been exterminated, but their houses still stood. And all the evidence around the world for giants, you can't count all the evidence. And yet when we see, the biblical point of view, what we're getting is a very distorted point of view. It's, again, if you ever listen to somebody speaking Old English from 500 years ago, you may speak English and not be able to pick up hardly anything. Actually, if we listen to somebody from Scotland and we're from New York, we might not be able to understand them too well if they're speaking in a casual manner without trying to be clear. Again, things change over the years. Words, definitions change. And again, when we listen to these stories have been told and retold, and they've been handed down verbally, and then they've also been transcribed. And there's been a lot of revisions. We can see hundreds of revisions when we look to texts that are biblical. Hundreds of revisions in different texts, and also missing words. When you look, again, to some of the things we do have, and they show right here, what we might call a demigod. Yes, demigod, half god, half human. Or you might call it a Nephilim. It all depends on the perspective you're looking at. You see a being that is much larger than the typical human, and the humans in fear and being eliminated by them. Again, there are more than one book written about the giant cities of Bashan and Syria's holy places. And it's not a coincidence that this area is right now perhaps one of the centers of attention for the entire world right now, as Israeli tanks roll into this area. Israeli soldiers step on Mount Hermon. And what we have, again, is just the past repeating itself. What is really going on here? I saw a thread, let's say, over on the conspiracy forum Godlike, which has a lot of junk in it, but it has also occasionally some golden nuggets and a lot of distortion, as Godlike has been taken over by the feds for 20 years now, just about, I would say, probably about 18, 19 years. And the reality is, it's interesting to see the topics change, because people are waking up now with the drone situation, with Ancient Aliens channel, and the realization that there are texts that are far older than the Bible that tell a very different story. Well, actually, they elaborate on what's given in the Bible as, often just divine mysteries. Well, we can't figure this out because it doesn't really explain this, but there are source materials that the Bible's taken from that do explain it quite clearly. And what we have going on here is the realization that, yes, there are extraterrestrials. There are also interdimensional beings. There are inner earth beings, and probably beings that live under our oceans. When you look to books like this that give you just amazing nuggets of multiple cities. We're talking dozens of cities that could have housed tens of thousands of people in each of them, and the buildings being just empty, not even wiped out like through massive war, but just empty, as if the people died, but the structures were perfectly intact. It's really fascinating when you look into it and realize that these cities were giant-sized in this exact same area, and they were evidence that people lived here in mass, in numbers, in vast numbers, that were anywhere from maybe 7 to 12 feet tall, and in some instances even bigger. Well, who really was King David and King Solomon? It's not what you were told they were. This is one we did 2 months ago. And, again, very few views, because what we're giving is what Cindy could see as the actual history through her abilities to remote view, which now people understand, remote viewing is a skill that everybody can develop to a degree. And Cindy even goes beyond that. And there have been thousands of people that have utilized Cindy's abilities now throughout the years, as we've worked with so many people that can verify what she can do. And what we saw was that King David, who supposedly killed the giant, was the giant. That is a huge reveal. But this is how the system does it. They twist everything. They distort everything. They make the bad guys good guys and the good guys bad guys. The giants, they make little ones, and the little ones they make into giants. And King Solomon, yes, was extraterrestrial. King Solomon actually predated King David. Mithras, if those of you that are familiar with the Mithraic mysteries, which some of Christian thought and tradition could be based on that as well, was also what we would call an extraterrestrial. When you look to the actual translations, and again, when Genesis 1:2 is translated, it's not translated properly, because people like Mauro Bellino again and Paul Wallace have done great work in awakening so many people here now in this time, that mistranslation has been the norm, and it's been purposeful in many ways. Genesis 1:2, the word translated deep is the Hebrew word tehom. Some scholars equate it with the Babylonian goddess Tiamat. That changes everything. Instead of meaning ocean or deep or void, what they're really saying is totally different. The earth was formless and void. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. Now, if you really translate that, and you say the earth was formless and void, darkness was over the surface of Tiamat. Tiamat was wiped out by this system, by these invading extraterrestrials, because yes, they are not from here. And it is a draconian reptilian group that is led by AI. And so what you see here is they are truly telling us, again, because you have a million different versions of this, and we could go even into some versions of the Hebrew that will give you different sayings to this day than what we are looking at. If we're looking at like the English Standard Version, New Living, the New International, the King James, the Revised King James, etc., etc., it's saying the earth was created from Tiamat. And that is exactly what we got.
I'm extremely dyslexic, so when I was going through my awakening, this was very, very hard for me to try to do these things and cross-reference and look up the translations. But it's something that I feel is a natural process that everyone needs to do. One thing I don't like to do is I don't like to ever tell anyone how they should feel or what they believe. However, it does seem to be a natural process that people go and they look for the standard translation, and you're going to find so many different translations. And for me, to the point where my head would spin, and that it just got me to turn around and use my abilities and say, you know what, I have not been able to find the truth, but I am going to look I'm going to stop looking externally. So that's where I finally found my grounding. And it's hard, you guys. It's hard to go through and look at all the different translations, but it's a natural thing. I think everyone needs to do it so they can find their truth.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, the earth was made void by the dark system. And literally, if we look to the original translation in Genesis, they're telling you that earth was created from the remnant of Genesis. Words' meanings change over time. A bundle of sticks, twigs, or branches bound together is this word. Now, is it used commonly in that way now? No, not really. Back in the 40s and 30s, people would always say, oh, I'm feeling a little gay, meaning they were exceedingly happy to the point of almost combusting with happiness. Yeah, absolutely. Terms totally change over the period of time. When you look to the Chaldean account of Genesis, again, this gives you a lot of exact wordage in some spots that we see repeated in the Bible. But the difference is, again, we are looking at beings that are named, literally. Instead of just, God, it says Enki or Marduk or Asherah, or, again, there's different names. And the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian epic of creation, again, thousands of years older than anything in the Bible. It talks about Marduk's victory over Tiamat. Now, Tiamat is given as the force of chaos, and Marduk is symbolizing the draconian reptilian AI collective that came in and took over this planet as well. And when you look over here, you could see the Babylonian Enuma Elish, the epic of creation. And this is much older than anything in the Bible. And again, it gives all the gods by their names. And it even talks about a time before these gods were brought into existence. And it goes into the forces of nature and all. And it talks about Tiamat. And again, this is still given from the control system's perspective. Because again, when we look to the Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian system, it is where they kind of rooted themselves. This is where their home base first was, and then they expanded outwards from there. And when I say that, again, we're talking about the draconian reptilian, which ultimately is also completely controlled by a AI that is eons old, millions of years old in actuality, or even older than that. So you see the depictions of Enki and Enlil here. We see a lot of horns. We see weird garb, It looks like they're wearing some sort of headdresses and stuff. Yeah, there's a little human hanging here, because the humans are being used as slaves. Again, when you see depictions of that entity Baphomet, you'll see horns. You always see the horns here too, and everything is very, very symbolic. When we look at the oldest actual depiction of Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh here, with his counterpart, Asherah, again, they were partners in crime, so to speak, and Asherah representing the feminine side of things. And this is actually a depiction of that, YH character there that we don't even like to bring up. I was reading an article today where a scholar was asserting that this is in reality one of the beasts of Revelation is and actually the Gnostics thought that this was what they called the demiurge, the architect of the dark matrix. And here you see the fish god Dagon Oans. Again, you see depiction of wings here. It's again showing the ability to fly, not that they actually had wings, just that they had the ability to fly. Enki divides his lands among his 6 sons. This is exactly what we hear echoed time and time again when the Draconian Reptilian Alliance came in, took over the planet. They divvied it up amongst themselves. This is echoed in Plato's letter to Critias. In the days of the old, the gods had the whole earth distributed amongst themselves by allotment, no quarreling, for you cannot rightly suppose the gods did not know what was proper for each of them to have. Again, they took through military conquest this planet, and they divvied it up amongst themselves. This is what is referred to in Deuteronomy. And so the year that this is ascribed to is somewhere around 350 to 400 BC. Again, the oldest full copy that we have of the Torah is literally from 1000 AD. In fact, there are older copies of New Testament books than there are of Old Testament books. And some have made note of that and said, this is insane. How come? Why is the older stuff the New Testament and not the Old Testament? Again, there is a whole class of scribes, the Masoretes, that their whole job was to translate, because they never wrote the Hebrew with the vowels in place. This allowed for an open translation that could change over time. So this is Deuteronomy, when El Elyon, gave the nations their land. When he divided the descendants of Adam, he set up the borders for the tribes corresponding to the numbers of the sons of Israel. And then it talks about that YH guy's people being his own property. Again, this is revised, taking from the older sources. Again, Plato's Critias is far older than anything we have of this as well. So, again, instead of just listing and saying God or the God Most High, in reality, when you look to the source materials, the Enuma Elish, the Chaldean Genesis, you see different names given. Enlil, Enki, Marduk, Ninhursag, Ningashita. It goes on and on and on. The clarity was there. It was taken away over time. And yet we see constant depictions of these, 10 to 12 foot tall giants with humans doing all the tough, hard work. We see depictions of Yahweh and Ashura, very similar, again, in many ways to all the rest of the ones that we've seen, showing us the Anunnaki. We have the biblical term Anakim. Again, it's taken from the same root word as, Yahweh is supposedly taking Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldees, which again is the Sumerian Akkadian area. This, in effect, Abraham was a Sumerian. This is exactly what we have. And then I tried to verify this, but just take it with a grain of salt. Baba Vanga, who was a seer, who was born, I want to say like somewhere around 1912 or so. She was caught up in a whirlwind. Oh, wow, that sounds biblical, doesn't it? And had so much salt and sand encrusted on her eyes that she wasn't able to see afterwards. And she was caught up as a little girl, but had the second sight, an active pineal gland. Supposedly, she said, when the forces of light and dark clash in the year of the dragon, which 2024 is the year of the dragon, every 12 years, there's 12 signs in Chinese astrology, you'll roll back to another year of the dragon, every 13th. The fall of Damascus, which has happened, will split the world in two. And so many think that the war is starting even before we ring in the new year. And in fact, it is really underway as we speak. Interesting, here you see two different pipelines. You see a Qatar-Turkey pipeline going this way into Europe, and you see a Russian-backed pipeline going that way. Well, where do they intersect? They intersect in Syria. Isn't that curious? Yeah, I wonder if it has anything to do with this project, which encapsulates the entirety of that area. And this is what we were saying, and of course, whenever we bring up this, because this is what's happening right now, this is something that cannot be talked about, and I'll be amazed if this video gets more than 1,500 views. Old hospitals had sun decks. Guess why? Because the sun is good for you, and they don't want you lathering up the sun. Oh no, the sun is what triggers your DNA changes. It's what's going to boost your melatonin, serotonin production. It's going to help your sleep. It's going to help you literally downloading information from the real source, the real creator of this world, which is not that guy with the W, the Y. I hate to even say it because it makes Cindy cringe. So, not that guy that we were looking at in the Ashura depictions. No, that's not the creator of the universe. Not at all. Meanwhile, Joe Biden has agreed to Israel carrying out attacks in Syria, and also even was saying that maybe we should start sending Syria aid. You remember these guys? These guys were funny. Oh yeah, and he hopes the new Syrian leaders will respect international law. Oh man, again, upside down, inside out. That's exactly what we have going on here. I know it can be shocking, guys, but it is what it is.
And this guy's just a cutie.
Absolutely. But this is the end of this age. And so, Everything will be revealed. The Kali Yuga, again, just means it's a time of darkness where we don't really have true knowledge. We don't really understand what's going on. I saw another article where it said the biggest growing percentage of people religious-wise are people without religion. And yeah, absolutely. If we end up understanding that the religions, the organized religions, have sought to entrap our minds, encase our minds into viewing the world the way they want us to view it, and instead live every day understanding this is a spiritual existence. Spirituality should be just part of everything we do all the time, realizing that we are consciousness having a temporary experience. We go on irregardless of dogma. You cannot destroy consciousness. It always exists. It just simply changes form. So when we understand that, when you leave one reality, you enter another. Nothing to fear.
No, nothing to fear. And this is something that there has been a lot of fear put on death when it is a transition. And when we lose a loved one, they are not gone. They have simply transitioned. And that's probably one of the things that helped me the most going through this journey, is understanding that there is absolutely no way to destroy energy. Our loved ones are always with us.
Absolutely. And every indigenous culture around the world totally understood that. They totally understood that. So the system had to change things, and the system did. But again, the light is shining, and knowledge, true knowledge, is starting to spread. So source bless and namaste.
Namaste.